gosh. Okay. Good morning. Today we are talking about how to make this skirt right here with all of the different tiers in it and how you would do that for your body measurements. So we're going to be walking through how to take the measurements for this skirt and then how you would build it out. So it's basically like a petticoat skirt, tiered skirt. They've been called many things. This is going to be really big this season. So I wanted to talk about how you would actually make this skirt. And there's no pattern for this class today because it's all going to be DIY based on your measurements. So good morning, everyone. I have a couple things that I printed out, and this is all going to be on my website for next week. Just give everybody just a minute to come on. How's everybody doing today? Anybody good? Should have stirred up any tea. I didn't. So this is what we're talking about. The skirt is tiered, which means that it has multiple layers around, right? And so there's a really easy way to do this. Excuse me. There's a really easy way to do this if you do it just based on your measurements. So we're going to start with the measurements that you need to take. Difficult. So today, this project, the question was, how difficult is this project? These aren't really that hard to make. It's just a lot of gathering and it's a lot of fabric. So other than that, it's not hard to make. So today I'm just going to be talking about how you would attack this project based on your measurements and how you're going to sew it together. I'm not going to be able to make this entire skirt in an hour, hour and a half. It's just not possible. I started making a skirt last night, and I'm going to show you my progress. There's one behind me here. This I made this week. This is petticoat style, so I'm also going to talk about this on the mini. So first you're going to be starting with your waist measurement, your full hip measurement, and then your waist to floor measurement. And that's the only measurements you need for this entire project. So it's basically going to be 2 blocks. This is your waistband piece here, and then your skirt piece. And then the cool thing is you can decide how many different tiers you want. So there's a lot of these skirts out here where they have taken the entire length measurement and divided it by 4. So it's even sections. This one's a little bit higher end, so it's got, you know, a longer section here, a thinner section here, and this has different fabric. So you can double them up. You can put lace on some of them. That's gonna make them stand out a little bit more. So these get really exciting. I am so sorry. Can you hear me now? Diane Thomas, can you hear me on Facebook? I need to talk a little bit louder. So the cool thing is that you can decide what you want your proportions to be. If you want 3 sections and you want them all to be divided, all you have to do is take that floor to waist measurement and divide it by 3, divide it by 4, divide it by 5, however many different sections you want. So that's how you're going to start with that. You're going to use that measurements to make your own pattern for this. So we're going to start with, if you were just making 1 tier from your waist to the floor, these are your blocks. So you've got your waistband. So this is your waist measurement plus 1-inch seam allowance. And then you've got your full hip width plus 1-inch seam allowance. And then, so this would be like just a straight tube here. And then this is your waist to floor measurement plus your hem allowance. So this is just the basic starting block of how you would cut the pieces and how you would know what size to cut. So from here, you break your pieces down into sections. Now this one here, I've just divided it equally by 4. I think maybe this one's a little bit wider. But so you would take your waist to floor measurement here and you would divide it into the sections that you want to use. So you just decide, I want 4 tiers and my waist to floor measurement's 43 inches, and you divide that by 4, and whatever you come up with, that's how you would cut those sections out. And this one over here, so this is like, you need to do your full waist measurement times 1.5. So say your full hip measurement is, 40 inches. So you would do 40 times 1.5, which is 60. Yeah, 60. So you would do a 60-inch wide section. So I actually like to cheat on this and do 60-inch wide fabric and do just cut strips across the fabric, all the way across. So it makes it super easy. And then I just do number of panels that I want to create the fullness that I want. So this here can give you like a really easy cheat sheet on, so if this is 1.5 and you want the next one to be just slightly more gathered, times 2, times 3, times 4, and you're gonna end up with something that has light gathering and gets bigger towards the bottom. Now, if you are really trying to recreate something like this, you can tell that this fabric is super thin and it's really lightweight. So we're talking like the thinnest netting that you can buy. This is pretty see-through here, which tells me that it's netting, but not like the stiff stuff that you make crinoline out of. This is just really, really thin, fine mesh fabric. These ones here, if you look up close, have a layer of lace underneath of them. Still rather see-through because you can still see her foot here. So that tells me that there's 2 layers here, thickness, 2 layers together sewn, and this one here is just 1, and that gives it a little bit more dimension. And I've seen a couple of these skirts have like over this seam, they'll have like a trim piece, or they'll do a lace here or a different lace up here and just kind of switch it up so it really gives it that dimension to the skirt. It really depends on what you're trying to achieve. So I actually have, and I started with this fabric here. And so I just cut the panels and then started running gathering stitches. So you sew your top layer and then you just attach the next layer. You gather it down and attach the next layer and attach the next layer. If you're trying to do something like this, these layers are gonna be significantly more. So you can see how gathered it is. It's very, very gathered, like nice and fine. So I would suggest doing something a little bit closer to this, where you have your waistband again. This is your waist measurement plus 1 inch seam allowance. And then I have here the height is 2.5 inches tall, which gives you like a 1 inch waistband when it's folded. So fold it over, 1 inch waistband, and then it gives you seam allowance. And then your skirt sections are gonna start with full hip width. So you wanna be able to get it up and down over your hips, obviously. So full hip width, and then your 1 inch seam allowance so that you can sew your panels together, right? And then you would multiply that times 3 to get a really gathered look, and then 4, 5, 6. There are some skirts where, like original petticoats, you would just double from one layer to the next. So this is how you construct this. So I've got my waistband here, and I've got my first layer gathered to the waistband. And then the second layer is gathered to the hem of the first layer, right? So then you get this really nice petticoat look to it, which in cotton, this is how this looks, or in a stiff fabric, or, you know, if you were to use a satin fabric, you know, it would hang a little bit differently. So based on your fabric choice, this is gonna hang differently, but I mean, this is even still beautiful. This is just plain white muslin, so I could show it what it looks like when it's done. So basically you've got this fullness all the way up. And then when this skirt is, say, in a super thin fabric like this, super thin, super fine mesh, it's gonna hang and drape like this. So the thinner your fabric, the thinner it's gonna look like this, and the less you double it up. So something that's not extremely doubled, like this one here, I just went double over double to get this full skirt. So I took this panel and then I doubled this round to get this one, and then I gathered that to the first hem, and then I did it again where I doubled from this one to this one to get this hem. And I really like the way that the last layer, I like when the last layer is a little bit longer because I feel like it gives it a little bit more weight visually at the bottom of the skirt. So I'm just gonna talk through my cutting process on this skirt. So this skirt today that I'm talking about is gonna be based on your own measurements. And I'm gonna be posting on my website, on my Sewing Saturdays page, kind of like a guide on how to cut your own version of this, and then do like a full sewing tutorial. Because like I said, it's a little bit difficult to talk through and sew this entire skirt, but I've got a couple pieces that I'm gonna be gathering while I answer some questions today. So to get this skirt, you have a waistband section, and then you have your different tiers, and then you gather down the tiers to do the skirt. So this is what this looks like, and then you just cut multiple layers of these. So I cheated when I did this last night, and I just cut 60-inch width fabric and just cut multiple strips over and over again. And then I just started running my gathering stitches. I sewed together the strips, and I started gathering it down like this. And I'm not totally sure if I'm happy with this. I really wanted it to look like this skirt here, but just with see-through black fabric. And I think it'll look like that, but I also kind of really like the way that this has like some dimension. It's got different layers with different amounts of like see-through. Question is, did I use a gathering foot? I do have a ruffler foot, but for these, because I wasn't sure how much it was going to gather down, I did not. I just put it through the machine with a really long stitch, and it kind of just gathered a little bit for me. Sometimes that happens, but I do have a ruffler foot. My only caveat with the ruffler foot is that I kind of have to know how gathered I want it to be exactly to use the ruffling foot, because the ruffling foot does 6 stitches per inch or 12 stitches per inch or 3 stitches per inch. It does the gathers like in intervals. So you kind of almost have to know what, like you have to have those measurements like designated out. So if you did though, like you planned this skirt out and you knew that everything was in intervals of 3, then it would be super easy, because then you could just use your ruffler foot on the 3 and then they would gather down exactly. So I do my gathering stitches, and I covered last week 3 different ways to do gathering. But I actually like to do the 2 rows of stitching next to each other. So you would go the highest on your seam allow or your stitch length. So if your stitch length is normally at like a 2.5, you go all the way up to 4 or as high as it'll go. And then you sew one row of stitching and the other row of stitching, and then you just gather down. So I'm also going to be doing a full post and video on that, the 3 different ways to do gathering stitches. But I like to do the method where you do 2 rows next to each other because I feel like it gives you the 2 rows and then you kind of like have that really pretty area to sew, and then your gathers always look fantastic. Right now I just have the 1 layer gathered or the 1 row sewn because I wasn't sure how full I wanted the layers to look. And how much it was going to gather down because I just kind of cut panels. So I was gathering them and I'm just kind of like fitting them to each other because this here is very forgiving. As you can tell, there's like so much that if you cut one panel or you were a little bit short or you're using scrap fabric, you can really do this with a ton of different things. And it's really just, it's forgiving. You can do different colors. You can make it kind of whatever you want. So I'm really on here today to talk about how you would tackle doing this with your measurements and kind of just talk through how I would put it together. So I cut for myself these rows. So this is the bottom row. I did 15 inches long on the longest layer on the bottom because I really, really like this look, how it has like a really long layer here. I think it's just really lengthening, which I kind of need. So I did a 15-inch length at the bottom, and then I kind of just proportioned it up the rest of the skirt. So I did 15, and then my next one up was 10, and then the next one up was 8. So and then by the time it gathers down, it'll look like this, kind of see-through. I would like it to be a little bit see-through. That kind of look is what I'm going for. So does anybody have any questions while I am going to get the stuff together and maybe kind of run through a couple gathering stitches here while I'm talking? But if anybody has any questions, please let me know. If you have any questions on how I got any of these measurements and how I broke this down. So waistband level, waist measurement, next layer, bottom layer, right? And then I just cut, like I said, I cheated on how I cut it because I was using 60-inch wide fabric. So I just cut 5 panels of the longest one, 4 panels, 3 panels, 2 panels, and I did a panel at the top because I really like this 5-layer panel look. And you can decide how you want to do that. So if you want your waist to floor measurement here, so your waist to floor measurement is super important in this skirt when you're planning, and you do 3 layers, 3 equal layers. So you just take your floor to waist measurement and you divide it by 3. And then whenever you go to cut your rows, you just add 1/2 inch so that you've got 1/4 inch seam allowance on both sides. So you do that for each one. And then by the time you sew 1/4 inch seam allowance top and bottom, 1/4 inch seam allowance, 1/4 inch seam allowance, 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then you do 1/4 inch seam allowance and then you hem the bottom, you've got your exact waist to floor measurement. So it's really, really easy to do this by your measurements, which is why I didn't want to do a pattern. I really wanted to talk through how you would figure this out on your own, because sometimes, somebody will come to you and they want you to make them a skirt and all they have is their measurements, or, you take measurements on them and then you think, how am I going to figure this out? So this is why I really wanted to talk through it this way to get you guys thinking, how can I manage this on my own? How can you manage this? How can you figure out how to make this skirt based on your measurements and just, just start cutting fabric. So this is how you divide it. The waist measurement, the hip measurement, and the waist to floor measurement. So this class normally starts at noon Eastern time. I am in Texas, so I am 11 o'clock. We are just talking about how you would tackle making a tiered skirt based on your body measurements or your client's measurements, your daughter, whoever. So this here, we're just talking about taking the waist measurement, the full hip measurement, so the widest part of your body across the hip, and then the waist to floor or waist to, wherever your hem would be. Yeah, so I'm just talking today about how to do this skirt. My class is only an hour and a half long, so I am just talking about the skirt today, but I am going to be posting full videos and tutorials on the Sewing Saturdays page. And if you guys ever come to class late or feel like you missed something, I always post my full class playback. The full class playback is on the Sewing Saturdays page on my link in bio. So if you go to my link in bio and you go to Sewing Saturdays, you can register. There's an email list there. The email just goes out one time a week and says what we're going to be doing. Very non-spammy. Just a quick email on what we're going to be doing. And then on the Sewing Saturdays page, it'll have information on when the next event is. And I think I'm going to bring back Wednesday nights too, because I had quite a lot of people like the Wednesday night class where I kind of did some pattern testing and answered questions. So I was just live, just to kind of be live and talk through stuff, answer questions on anything anybody wanted to talk about. But today I'm doing a no pattern. How would you tackle this if you needed to make this skirt for your body? So we're going to take waist measurement, full hip measurement, and the waist to the floor measurement. That sounds great, Wendy. I would love to have you. So the skirt, I'm just going to do this one more time before I start gathering fabric. You have your waist measurement here, your waist plus 1 inch seam allowance, and then your height is going to be 2.5 inches. 2.5 inches makes you have a waistband that's folded in half, and then you have that the seam allowance at the bottom of it. So it's just a 1 inch waistband, and then you've got that seam allowance attached. And then the next one is going to be your full hip measurement. Now, depending on how gathered you want your skirt to be, this skirt is doubled. Every layer going down is doubled, and that's why it looks like this. And it's, I think, gorgeous, right? Muslin is a little bit stiffer, so if you were using like a really stiff fabric, this is how that would turn out. If you're using a really fine mesh, hi Barb. If you're using a really fine mesh, this is what that's gonna look like. It's gonna hang really, really nicely. And it's going to, so if you were to pull this skirt out and up, it's gonna look like this. But the difference is the material is thicker here and thinner here. Okay, so I'm just talking through because I really love this skirt. The skirt's going to be popular this season. This is from Zuhair Murad's collection for fall 2022. So these skirts are coming out right now, and they're going to be super hot this season. So I wanted to talk through how you would do this for your measurements, right? I know, it's beautiful. I love it, absolutely love it. I also have an example. So I actually picked this fabric here, right, for my skirt that I am making. But I also have one that I want to do that I'm going to use this mesh for. So this is very, very see-through. And I'm going to do probably the same skirt that's in the picture. but I want to find a couple different things to make it a little bit more interesting than just straight rows of the same fabric. So that being said, does anybody have any questions for me before I start sewing? I'm going to do a little bit of sewing. I'm going to do some gathering stitches and show you kind of how I would attach some things together on this skirt and answer some questions today. I am going to be posting the full breakdown of how I make this skirt for myself and then what it looks like at the end. But obviously in an hour class, I really can't cover that because it's a lot. The printable is in the link. So I will have this up, these kind of guides. I'll have these up on the website today. I didn't get a chance to get them up because I was kind of compiling a whole post for it. So what I've been doing is doing like a blog post, but I also have all of the information, all of the extras, and then all of the like video content all in one place for each thing that I'm doing. So I don't have that up yet, Wendy, but I will get it up and I'll be sending that out in the email list. So sign up for that email so that'll come out to you. And yeah, we're going to talk about how I would tackle putting this together. So another thing I wanted to talk about is how on earth would you figure out how much fabric you need, right? There's no pattern. You're just looking at a picture and you're thinking, I know it's a lot of fabric, but how am I going to figure it out, right? So I used 60 inches wide fabric and I cut strips all the way across. So all I did was I added each row. So I wanted my bottom one to be 15 and I wanted to cut 5 rows of 15. So I did 15, 15, 15, 15, 15, right? Plus seam allowance. And then the next one was 10. So I did 4 rows of 10. So then that's another 40 inches plus seam allowance. And I calculated that all out so that it would come out to how many rows I would need to cut and how much fabric I would need to order. Because I actually ordered my chiffon fabric from a place called Fabric Discount Warehouse. And it's like $2 a yard, which I cannot get at a regular grab it off the shelf store. So that's how I did that. And that's how I ordered it. And I ended up needing, I ordered 8 yards of the black for my skirt that I'm making. So it's kind of just a ballpark. I am 5'9" and my hip measurement is 45, maybe? I don't know. So I just did 60-inch width strips and then I just cut to make it easy. I chose 5 strips, 4 strips, 3 strips, 2 strips, and then 1 strip at the top, and then the waistband. So it looks like a lot of fabric, and here's how I organized it. So I labeled them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 because I'm doing 5 rows in a row, and I pinned them, and so as I cut the panels, I pinned them together where I'm going to sew them, right, at their edge seams. And then I pinned them together like that so they look like this. And then I just put, this is row number 3, row number 2, row number 1, so that I had them kind of organized because I did different measurements. If you're going to do the same measurement, say you're going to take your your floor to waist measurement and you're going to divide by 3 or 4 so that all of the panels are the same, all of your tiers are the same width, right? So maybe your tiers are, maybe your waist to floor is 40 inches and you want to do 4. So each row is 10 inches of fabric, 10, 10, 10, and 10. So when you go to do that, all you'll have is just kind of piles of 10-inch wide strips. So then you'll just gather them down and decide if you want to do, if you want to do the 2, 3, 4, 5 panels. So if you've got 2 panels, 3 panels wide, 4 panels wide, and then you just gather it down to the last one's hem every single time. So you're gonna run your gathering stitches. I'm gonna talk about my favorite way, my favorite method, which is 2 rows next to each other. And I'm gonna show you why I like that better than 1. So I have my sewing machine is gonna be set at, I apologize, I look like I'm really low. I've got my table kind of up high right now. I've got my strip off, saving energy. Okay, so right now I have 1 row of stitching because I kind of wanted to do just like preliminary, see where I'm at, see how much it's gonna take to gather it down. If you want to use wider seam allowance, you really like having 5/8 inch seam allowance, all you have to do is account for that and you're adding it up. So when you're cutting your panels out, you just add 5/8 to the top and bottom. So you're gonna be adding 1 1/4 inch total. So 5/8 at the top, 5/8 at the bottom, and then the length that you want your panel to actually be when you finish sewing it. So I prefer, so I push my stitch length all the way up. Oh my gosh. So I push my stitch length up so that you have really long stitches, really long stitches. So on a normal regular machine, you're gonna turn it, it's gonna say like 2.5 is your normal stitch length. And that's pretty standard. So 2.5 is gonna be a normal stitch length, and you would bump it up to 4 or 4.5 or 5 or whatever it'll let you do. The higher the number, sometimes it gathers itself because it's kind of pulling really thin fabric and through. So what I'm gonna do is, I have really long thread tails. So this is a quilting machine, and the interesting thing about this machine is that it has like a thread cutter built in, which is really nice until I start using gathering stitches because I really need those long thread tails to gather down. So when you have the long thread tails, you pull your thread tails out and then you start sewing. You don't do a back stitch, you just start sewing. And then you gently pull one of the threads and you gather it down. Well, on this machine, it has the automatic cutting, so I can push it and it just like cuts the thread for me. But the problem with that is then there's no thread tails. There's no long thread tails to gather. So that is one thing that I have been learning recently. Janome just sent me these machines to sew on, to work through with you guys. And I just have been having to learn like the whole new machine. So I'm right now doing a second row of gathering stitches on this, and I'm going to show you why I prefer this, because when I go to sew it, the 2 rows of gathering stitches kind of just lays a lot better when you go to attach it to the next row. But it does take a lot more time and a lot more thread because you're doing a whole nother row of stitching, and sometimes that's just not feasible because it takes forever. So I'm just gonna do 1 panel. Also, another thing that I do when I'm making a skirt like this, I only run the gathering stitches along the length of 1 panel, and when I get to the seam, I stop, because when you break those gathering stitches by pulling and pulling and pulling all the way around, and we're talking 5 panels wide at 5 feet, so you're talking 25 feet length of gathering stitches, or you run out of bobbin thread, or it just makes more sense to me to do it in chunks. So I actually only gather each panel individually, and I'm going to show you that. So right now I'm just running that second gathering stitch, and I think that the second gathering stitch just gives me more control, which is probably why I like it. If you do choose to use the 5/8 inch seam allowance for your skirt, then you sew the first row at 5/8, and then you sew the next row in between the 5/8 and the edge of the fabric. If you're doing the 1/4 inch, you kind of have to sew the first at the 1/4 inch and then just find the middle of that. So long thread tails, So when you're running your gathering stitches, I have two rows of gathering stitches on this one, 2 rows on this one versus 1 row on this one. Although 1 row is quicker and less thread, I like to use 2. No, I can't even grab it. Why? So you need to get the thread from the top. I do the top. Sometimes people say that the bobbin thread is easier, which means that it would be the back side of the fabric. So I've got 1 thread from each row. So in this case, I've got 2 threads in my hand, and they're the top thread. So then this just slides, right? Like it just slides over and gathers down, okay? And the difference between 2 rows of stitching versus 1 row of stitching, I'll show you. When I go to sew it, it's like really nice to sew because it's like flat, right? And all the stitches are like right together. Versus, now this isn't super gathered, but this is just 1 row of stitching. And it kind of gets all crazy because it's just not, I don't know how to explain it. But when you do the 2 rows of stitching next to each other, it kind of gives you like that, it gives you like a flat, nice place to sew. So that's why I like to do it. But sometimes I will do 1 row of stitching because I'm, crunched on time or anything, I don't know. Sometimes I'm just lazy. So this is how I would gather down each panel at a time. I'm going to show you that too. So this is 1 panel. End to end, right? So I have 1 panel, and that has separate gathering threads from the next panel. You can see this is where the seam allowance is here, which I'm gonna serge off very finely, but this panel has its entire gathering stitches. So what I'll do is I'll sew up to that seam line, and then I will lift my presser foot, pull off thread tails, snip them, and then start on the next panel. Because if you rip the stitches, if you run out of bobbin thread, it's a lot easier to go back down that small section versus 25 feet of skirts. How far apart? So because I'm doing a thin fabric, I chose 1/4 inch seam allowance because I don't want to be cutting off a whole lot of fabric every time when I get down to sewing them together and then serging off the excess, because this is very ravelly fabric. So what I have is in my 1/4 inch seam allowance. So this is a 1/4 inch wide, and my gathering stitches are 1/4 inch from the edge and then in the middle. So, or maybe it's, I probably cheated a little bit. This is probably like 3/8. So there's probably 1/8 of an inch, a little bit over 1/8 of an inch in between the gathering stitches. Normally I would do 1 row at 5/8 and then 1 row at the in-between 1/4 of an inch mark, so that you've got plenty to work with. But I really didn't want to be cutting off so much fabric, because then when I take it over to the serger and I go from, I'm serging down that row that I stitched and gathered, I'm really cutting off a whole 1/4 of an inch all the way around for 25 feet on each row, on the serger. So I really didn't want to be cutting off so much fabric. Does anybody else have any other questions? I am planning to, so I did 4 panels at 10 inches and then 5 panels at 15 length. And I think I really want my 15-inch panels. I want more like heaviness. I almost want to mimic this, like, where'd it go? This is so cute. I really want to do, I think I'm going to do this skirt with the white mesh, but I really kind of really like this, like, it looks heavier on the bottom row. So I think I'm going to cut maybe a panel or 2 more panels of the 15-inch down here. Question is, I'm still a beginner, so will I need to gather them by hand? I have an old machine. If you have an old machine, all you have to do, so if your gathering stitches are straight stitches, put your machine on a straight stitch, and then you just use your stitch length selector and just turn it to as high as it'll go. And that is going to give you really long stitches all the way down your project. And you do 2 rows next to each other, and you lift up the top thread on both, so your top threads, and you hold on to them really tight, and you just pull it so it just gathers really nicely. I am going to be doing a full tutorial video on gathering stitches, so be looking out for that. Maybe I can tag you in that. On how to do the gathering stitches. You don't need any fancy equipment. You don't need any fancy ruffling feet. You don't need any of that. You could gather by hand, but it would take you a really long time for 25 feet of fabric. And if you have a sewing machine that does straight stitching, it's super easy. Question was, does it matter which line you sew first? If you're doing tiers like this, she's asking, what is an old machine? She's had hers for 16 years. I had mine before that for 10, and my daughter broke it. So this is just, I happen to have this because Janome sent me this machine to work on. So it doesn't matter which row you sew. I'm actually starting with the bottom row, and I was sewing it to pinning it. I started by pinning it to this layer here, because I wanted to see how full it was going to be. I really kind of almost don't care how full these layers are to me. These layers actually look like they have backing on them so that they're not quite as see-through, which is kind of cool, unless you're going for the really see-through look. And again, you can kind of change the fullness. So it depends on how you want to start. If you want to start from the top and work your way down, that's great. But if you want to start from the bottom, because I really wanted to see the fullness at the bottom, so I started at the bottom personally, but some people like to start at the top and work their way down. It just depends on what you're willing to, how much fabric you're willing to have under your machine. So if you wanted to, say, maybe sew 2 or 3 rows together for the top and 2 or 3 rows together at the bottom, and then sew that row around together to attach the 2, you're kind of working with less fabric at one time. It depends on how much room you have here, how much table space you have, that kind of stuff. Sometimes I like to work in chunks and then chunk them together because it's more satisfying. It feels like it comes together faster. It doesn't actually, but for me, it feels like it does, so that's why I do it that way. But I did start with the bottom to the next row up because I wanted to see how much fullness there was. And I think I am going to cut maybe 2 more rows of fullness for the bottom layer. And I don't know, maybe we'll see if the number 3 layer is going to also have another row, because it just doesn't feel like it's enough fabric for me. I really want it to be the crazy, I really want it to look like kind of like this, but in the black chiffon see-through fabric. So this is the skirt that I'm making. I am going to do the white one though. I really want to do, I mean, I can't get over that. I look at this and I'm like, I cannot get over that. I have to make it. So that's why I wanted to talk to you guys about this today and talk through how you might tackle it on your own. Does anybody have any questions? This is going to be up on my page by today. I'll have these graphics up, and I'll have kind of like a full breakdown of how I'm doing what I'm doing, some tips. There's some really cool tips on if you're cutting chiffon, how to cut the rows straight so that you don't have wavy craziness. So if you have any questions on this, please ask me, because I'm just going to talk through it one more time so that you guys have an idea of how you would do this for your body. So this is the skirt we're talking about, right? This is Zuhair Murad 2022 fall. They just came out with the pictures, or I don't know when they came out, but I got a notification and I saw it, and I've been wanting to sew this skirt for a while. So I wanted to talk about you need your waist measurement, your full hip measurement, and then your waist to floor or waist to hemline. So if you're including, this person has heels on, if you're including the extra for the heels, you will need that full measurement there. And then you're just going to divide if you want 3 sections, 1, 2, 3, if you want 4, if you want them evenly divided, if you want them to do if you would do say you have 40 inches from your waist to your floor, you would do, if you're doing ones that get progressively bigger, you would do, I don't even know what all those come out to be, but you would do whatever plus 5 plus 10, and then it would get progressively bigger chunk, basically. I do have an email list. If you go to my link in bio under Sewing Saturdays, there is a sign-up form to put your name and your email in. And I send out an email once a week that tells you what I'm going to be talking about for class and what supplies you might need if we're going to be making something. If you want to sew along, some of them are sew-alongs. Some of them are pattern sew-alongs. Some of them are going to be flat pattern drafting. Some of them, like last week, I literally just talked about different ways to gather ruffles and how you use them and when you use them and why you use the different ways. So sometimes it's just a topic that someone's asked me to talk about, and I just think, a lot of people could probably use this, so I'm going to talk about it for a whole class. So the email list is on my link in bio under Sewing Saturdays, and you can sign up for that email list. It's 1 email a week, and it also includes, if you missed during the week, what blog posts were new, what extra videos I put up on my website, what extra videos went up on social media, just in case you missed it. So it's not anything more than just kind of information, and there's usually a ton of freebies. Also right now for free, I have I've extended the free period on my How to Draft a Skirt class, drafting a skirt from your own measurements. That's on my website under learn how to pattern draft, learn patterning. I should probably know that. So it's either learn to sew or learn pattern drafting, and under pattern drafting, the How to Draft Your Own Skirt is on there right now. I've extended that as free right now on my website. So look at my link in bio on all of my social media channels and head over to my website, sign up for the email list so that you don't miss anything. And also don't forget to sign up for the email, and don't forget to check under How to Draft a Skirt. That's free right now. Sign up for that. So for this project, the question is ruffle or foot, traditional 2 basting stitches, or zigzag over a thread. What do I prefer? For this, I am using 2 rows of basting stitches, gathering stitches for this, because for the chiffon, I feel like it just makes it go a lot easier, and it makes it easy for me to sew 1 row to the next because it lays really nice. I did show last week the zigzag over the thread method. I like to use that for netting when I'm doing crinoline, because I feel like if I do 2 basting stitches with the big open holes on the netting, it makes it a little bit difficult sometimes. So I like to use the zigzag for the netting, really the thick, stiff netting. That's what I like to use that for. But the ruffle or foot in this case, because when I'm cutting the panels, I'm not totally sure how much gathering I need to do. That's why I'm gathering it down. So I did mention this, but I will cover this again because I think it's really important. I have panels. It was 60-inch wide fabric, and so I just cut panels. And so I do the gathering stitches only for the length of one panel. And then I have my thread tails at the seam. And then I start the next row of gathering stitches for the next panel. Because if you are doing, 5 panels wide, if you run out of bobbin thread or you break your stitches or, whatever happens, it happens. I like to do each panel individually because then you can kind of, if the threads break, you can either fudge it in or you can go back and run some more gathering stitches and it's just a small section versus like realizing that you're pulling the gathering stitches and now you've just lost 5 or 6 feet of gathering stitches because it's all attached to one. So I do each individual panel with its own gathering stitches so that I'm only working in chunks at a time. I find it easier to do, put down, walk away from, come back to, and then that way I'm not struggling so much with trying to mentally attack a project like this because this is a lot of gathering stitches, it's a lot of thread, it's a lot of fabric. I cut all my panels last night because I really wanted to sew it together today, and then I realized that between my 5th and my 4th row, I didn't have as much as I wanted. So it kind of gave me the opportunity to like dry fit the ruffles together, which is like just pinning it to see how much gathering I'm gonna need. And I kind of really want it to be full, like full at the bottom, just like this one. So this is my inspiration, and this is how I'm attacking it pattern-wise, cutting the strips. I have 60-inch wide fabric, and I just cut the strips like this. And then you can decide how many panels you need. You can decide how long you want it, how many different sections you want to divide out. If you want to do 3 equal sections, if you want to do tiered sections where they are progressively bigger towards the bottom, or the other way around if it gets smaller at the bottom. I found this picture. This was on Pinterest because I follow, and also I follow, on social media and stuff like that. So if you can find your skirt on Pinterest, then you can kind of just decide, how many sections you want and how long it needs to be from your waist to the floor. And don't forget to add your seam allowance measurement in between here and here and here and here. So add your seam allowance as you go. So each panel, say if the panel is going to be 10 inches wide from top to bottom, you need to add 1/4 inch or 5/8, 1/4 inch or 5/8 to hem. I did buy 8 yards of this because I added up how many panels I was going to do, and I think I gave myself a little bit of overage, but I did order this from Fabric Wholesale Direct, which is a website that I use quite often, the fabric's like $2.50 for a yard, which I can't beat. If I go to buy the chiffon from Joann's or something like that, it's so much more, especially now. So it's like $2.50 a yard. I got 8 yards of this fabric so that I could put it together and do my full tutorial for my website and for you guys. And so if you were interested in making this skirt, you would add, say this is a 15-inch panel, right, times 4. So you would go 15 plus your seam allowance. So I did 15.5, and then you would go 4 times. So you would cut 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's 60 inches, right? So you need 5 feet, and then, your next row is 10, so 10.5, and I'm doing 3, so I would do 10, 10, 10, 10, and then that's how you would slowly add those together to get your yardage, and then you would just divide it by 36 inches. So I did add up all the inches and then divide it by 36 inches gives you your number of yards that you would have to calculate to make your skirt. Does anybody have any questions on that? Because I know it might sound like a lot. It probably sounds like a lot. Does anybody have any questions? Any questions at all on how to calculate, how to cut, how to do any of those things? I'm going to be posting some snippets today and tomorrow as well. And then I'm going to do a full breakdown on the skirt, on the gathering, on the cutting. Cutting chiffon can be super tedious. There's some tricks that I like to use for cutting the chiffon, so I think those are super helpful. I'm going to put those on there too. And then I'm going to have Wendy, I think you asked, for this diagram, I'm going to have this posted today for you guys. And then I'll send out all of that in the email list as well, because I meant to have it out before class, and my kids started school this week, so that didn't happen. I did cut with the selvage. I just cut straight across. I did that because I basically just used my selvage to sew the seams together, and then I'm just going to serge it off really tiny so that I basically have like a nice sturdy edge to sew. So the question was, did I cut with the selvage? I cut straight across, and then I just sewed the selvage together. So this is the selvage. I just sewed them together, and then I'm just going to go back and serge them like really, really small together. Sometimes I like to do French seams where you sew it inside out, trim it down, and then you sew it, fold it back the other way and sew it. I have a tutorial on that on my website. If you're interested in French seams, I like to use French seams for see-through fabrics a lot. But for this project, because there's so much fabric, like there's so much fabric that you won't be able to tell that there's serged seam lines. Really, you're not going to be paying attention that close. So I am just going to do the serger for those. And the selvage is different, but I am going to have to serge probably the whole inside of it to keep it from fraying, because it's fraying already just gathering it down. It's kind of just fraying like crazy. So I am going to serge the whole inside. So French on vertical seams, horizontal seams look funny. I think it's a preference on what you like to do. You can also people do mock French seams for curves, stuff like that. It kind of just depends on what the situation is going to be. But like I said, because there's so much, I think it'll just be quicker for me to just run it through the serger once I get them all ready to go. So today I talked about this skirt. I talked about how you might look at this skirt, you find your skirt on Pinterest, and how you would break down cutting these out, right? So you have your waist measurement, your full hip measurement, and then your waist to floor measurement. So if you were to make this skirt for someone else, or you are making it for yourself, all you basically have to do is have those measurements. So super easy measurements, and then break it down into strips of fabric, your waistband, your waist measurement plus 1 inch seam allowance. Now, if you wanted to do say you wanted to do the skirt, right? And you want the front part of the skirt to be straight, but you want the back part of the skirt to have a elastic in it. I would do your waist measurement, cut it in half so that the front half of your skirt has a straight waistband, and then do the back half of it so that the total measurement measures this piece, and then just stick the elastic in the back half. Can you invert the video? Oh, can you guys not read this? I'm so sorry. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to do that. So these graphics are going to be on my website under Sewing Saturdays, and there's going to be a full video on this. Can anybody tell me how to invert the video? I'm sorry, I don't know how to do that. I guess that would be a little bit difficult to read. Sorry, Angela. I'm going to post these. I'm going to post all of these in, I don't see, I don't know where that's at. Settings, comments, moderators, ranking, muted accounts, blocked accounts. It is not in here. I'm sorry, it's not in there. Okay, so anyways, so you would break it down into, so your, I'm sorry that this is not inverted. So your waist to floor measurement, you would divide it into how many sections you want it to be. And then you would do 1, 2, 3, 4. I have 4 here, and then I'm sorry, I can't figure that out. I don't know how to do it. It's not in my share arrow. So you would divide it into how many sections you wanted to do, and then you would just make these get progressively bigger based on how much fabric you want. So you can double them. If you go from the first one to the second one, you can double it, and then double to the next one and double to the next one. If that's how you wanted to do it. That's basically how I did this one, and that kind of gives you a visual idea of how much fabric that turns into. But this is kind of like the original petticoat style skirt that they wore underneath of skirts. So this is just muslin fabric. It's a little bit heavier, so it's not going to lay as nice as the really thin mesh like this skirt is here. Really super fine mesh is going to hang like this. I have like this here. It's like super fine, like one layer of it's like really, really thin. So I'm gonna try and do one of these skirts as well with like this. So by the time you gather this down, you know, you could do a whole foot of fabric turns into, I don't know, 4 inches. So it just depends on how much fabric you have, how much you gathered it, and then figuring out how much you need to cut. I'm also going to do a breakdown on that too, so that you have it. I know I feel like I'm just talking in circles right now, but you would just multiply the width that you want times however many panels you're going to cut. So my fabric was 60 inches wide, and I just cut strips of 60 inches wide fabric, and then I'm just gathering them together. I'm going to attach them together, and then I will post a video and a skirt, finished skirt for you guys to show you. And then I'll have under my Sewing Saturdays page, right before I get off here, I'm going to tell you guys, go to my Sewing Saturdays page under my link in bio, and click on the Sewing Saturdays link. Sign up for that email registration, because that's going to be where you get what I posted this week. And you know, if you want to watch it, great. If you don't, that's cool too. Any blog posts that I posted that I think are going to be helpful, and what we're going to be doing for next week's class. And that way you'll have an idea on what you need to purchase for next week's class if you want to do the sew along. If not, you just want to show up and watch, that's totally cool too. And then I always post a full playback of class. So everything, the entire length of the video, I just post it on that Sewing Saturdays page. All the way at the bottom, there's playbacks for all the classes. So you can watch old classes, and you can go through it step by step if you want to go through an old class. And then, what else? I think that's it. Does anybody have any questions? Oh, one other thing. On my link in bio, under Learn Pattern Design, sign up for the free, it is free right now, Learn How to Draft a Skirt class. That is a full class. I'm going to be building all my classes out so that they look like that, so that they're in like a, I don't know, like a course kind of format, so that you can kind of stop and start wherever you want, and you can go at your own pace. So that is a free class right now, how to draft your own skirt from measurements. So you would take your measurements, your mannequin's measurements, your daughter's measurements, your client's measurements, and you can draft a skirt block, custom skirt block from that. So that is a free class right now. So go to my link in bio under pattern drafting, learn to draft a pattern. I don't know. I need to know what I'm talking about before I get on here probably. Learn to pattern draft and sign up for that class. It is free. And I'm going to ask if anybody has any questions. I'm probably going to pop off here now. I've been on for an hour today. I wanted to be able to sew an entire skirt with you guys, but I can't do that in an hour. So I'm just going to be posting follow-up videos and then a full breakdown of sewing this skirt together probably. So let me know if you have any questions. And as always, contact me on any social media. You can email me, Jacqueline@jacquelineterry.com, or contact me on my website if you have any questions or anything that you want to see. I'm always open to comments on my videos on things that people would like to see done, because it gives me more things to sew, and that gives me a better idea of what you guys want to see. So if you have anything that you ever want to see sewn, you have a question, you're working on a project, tag me, comment on my post and say, hey, I'm working on this, can you do a video? I would love to do that. So let me know if you guys have any questions at all. Reach out to me on all my platforms and my email. And don't forget to go to my link in bio, sign up for the email on Sewing Saturdays for next week and the playback for class. And also check out that how to draft a skirt pattern class. It is free right now. I've extended it to try and give a little bit more time for people to sign up for it. So that class is free. Check out my website and let me know what you think. And thank you guys so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. And let me know if you have any questions.